So I'm a huge fan of the Adidas YEEZY Foam Runner. In fact, I think this might be one of my favorite Yeezy shoes to ever release. There are a lot of reasons why I love the YEEZY Foam Runner. First off, this shoe looks insane. There's nothing else on the market that looks quite like this shoe. The second is that this shoe is insanely comfortable, and I think that's due in part to not only the foam that they used, but the overall design of the shoe. And the third is that while this shoe looks complex and crazy, it's actually a surprisingly simple design. It's all made up of one material, it's all one piece, and it was all molded at once. And so for me, it makes sense why the YEEZY Foam Runner is taking the sneaker world by force and becoming one of the most popular shoes on the market. And especially now in 2022, when brands like Crocs and Merrell are releasing shoes that are becoming popular, it just makes sense that this shoe is as big as it is. And consequently, it stands to reason why Kanye West and Adidas would like to release a second version of this shoe. In fact, there's actually leaked images that just circulated the internet of what could be the YEEZY Foam Runner V2. And this image is actually the reason for this video. I love the Foam Runner. It's one of my favorite shoes in my entire collection, and I have over 100 pairs of shoes, but there's something about this new version of the Foam Runners that I just don't really like, and so I decided, why not design one for myself? What's up everybody, I'm Seth Fowler, and today I'm designing my own version of the YEEZY Foam Runner V2. But before we dive into today's video, I've actually got a huge announcement. As a lot of you know, a year and a half ago, I started my own sock brand called APTHCRY, and over the last year and a half, the support that you guys have shown us has been absolutely incredible. In fact, every single collection that we've had has sold out within the first 10 minutes to the first hour. It's insane. But one thing that's really been bugging me is that because we've been dropping these special edition collections, we've never had a collection that's just always available on the website that you guys can come to and actually grab. In fact, after every single drop, I get a lot of messages from you guys letting me know that you either missed out on the release or you didn't wake up in time or something like that, and you wish there was more pairs available. And I totally understand that. In fact, since we first started the brand, we never intended it to be a brand that consistently sold out. In fact, our first drop was supposed to last for a couple weeks. And over the last year and a half, this whole thing has been a learning experience for us. We've been learning how to work with factories and produce quantities that are enough for you guys, and I think now we've finally been able to do that, and because of that, I'm so excited to announce our brand new Basics collection, which should be always available. So this is it, our Basics collection. Right now it comes in two different colors. We've got black crew length socks and white crew length socks. And each one of these pairs comes in packs of 2. So you get 2 pairs of black socks or 2 pairs of white socks. And each socks feature our embroidered APTHCRY logo right there on the ankle area. So our Basics collection officially launches this Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And if you're watching this video after the launch, there will be a link in the top of the description below. But the great thing is that each one of these 2 packs retail for $27, which is actually cheaper than buying 2 different pairs because we usually sell them at $15 a pair. And while we made a huge quantity of these socks just in preparation for this launch, if they do happen to sell out, don't worry, they will be coming back. We're going to restock these as often as possible, so you should never have trouble getting these socks for yourself. And again, if you want to grab a pair of these or a couple different pairs of these for yourself, there will be a link in the description below after launch, which is this Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. But now let's get right back to the Foam Runners, and yes, this is another pair. I have multiple pairs. I have a sneaker problem. So in this video, what I'm gonna do is sketch out a couple different concepts of what could be YEEZY Foam Runners, and I'm gonna start out sketching like really rough sketches, and then I think I'm gonna pick 2 of those different concepts and sort of elaborate on them and create more finished versions of those shoes. And I think the 2 different styles that I'm gonna design are one version being a very iterative improvement on the original Foam Runner because I love the way this shoe looks, and I think I'm gonna only change things up a little bit and kind of just make it look like a real V2 version of the shoe. And then the second version that I'm gonna create is just a completely out there design, something totally different, but still in line with Yeezy's design language. So I guess without further ado, let's just dive right into it. So for my first concept, I wanted to start off with a shoe that looked a lot like the original Foam Runners, and a lot of the design of this shoe was informed by the original shoe. However, I did want to change up a couple things, like I like the idea of extending the back of the shoe, kind of like the Sacai Nike LD waffles. I just love that aesthetic, and I also wanted to change up the placement of some of the ventilation holes. The next design was a little bit more out there, and that's because I decided to base the texture on the upper of the shoe on something organic, and in this case I decided to go for coral. And the reason I did that is because it seems like Adidas and Yeezy really love the idea of creating shoes that look like they were grown. I mean, it's interesting too because the foam used in Foam Runners was actually grown from algae. It's kind of crazy. So having that sort of organic design aesthetic just makes sense when it comes to Yeezy shoes, and I'm actually really happy with the way that this shoe came out. For the next one, I wanted to try something a little bit more geometric, so I decided to go for a much more triangular base design. I wanted to add a bunch of triangular cutouts on the toe and on the side of the shoe, and I wanted these triangular shapes to almost act as the structure of the side of the shoe. Now, I didn't love the way that this came out. I wasn't really happy with the placement of the triangles and how they didn't really sort of flow with the design. It felt like they were just kind of tacked on. So while I didn't mind this design overall, it wasn't something that I wanted to move forward with. Because I didn't love the direction that the last concept took, I decided to try something a little bit closer to the original shoe design, except rather than trying to create something that was completely different, I decided to just cut away at the surface of that shoe and try and create something that kind of had some nice movement to it, some swirls to it, and actually sticking with the sort of organic theme, I decided to make it kind of look like a shell. And then I decided to get wild with it, and I feel like that's important whenever you're designing a shoe or really anything. You gotta try all the different options. And obviously, because I was doing this in like a 3-hour time frame from start to finish, I didn't have a huge amount of time to experiment and try a bunch of different things. But for this concept, I wanted to try something that was very organic and very ripply and kind of looked like you pulled it right out of the ocean, or maybe it was part of the ocean. So the idea behind this concept was sort of a wave, which is funny because Kanye's made the Wave Runner. To be honest though, it didn't really end up looking like a shoe. Not that the Foam Runner looks like a shoe, but it wasn't something I wanted to move forward with. For the next concept, I wanted to try something that kept the overall shape of the Foam Runner, or even the Knit Runner for that matter, except add something that kind of gave the shoe a little bit more personality. And in this case, I decided to give it these sort of spikes that made the shoe look like it was moving very quickly, or maybe gills on the side of a shark. I don't know what the inspiration for this shoe was, I just liked the shape. And because I really like the shape of these spiky things, I decided to add perforations, or I guess ventilation holes on the side of the shoe that lined up with these spikes, so it all kind of flowed together nicely. And I was actually pretty happy with the way this shoe came out. It was at this point I realized that we hadn't done a high top or mid top version of the Foam Runner, and while I don't think that's a great idea overall, especially not for wearability, I decided to try it. And I based my concept on another Yeezy concept of the YEEZY 450 slides, I think is what they're called, and gave it a very skeletal look. And honestly, the more that I drew this shoe, the less I liked it. In fact, by the time I finished this concept, I really hated it, and so I kind of wish that I just scrapped this concept altogether. But again, I'm just trying to throw up a bunch of different ideas on a wall and see what sticks, and unfortunately, this is not an idea that stuck. And then for the final concept, I decided to lean into the idea of mashing up the Knit Runner with the Foam Runner. So giving the shoe the Knit Runner shape and that sort of cool midfoot punch out that you have in the Knit Runner, but also adding some of the Foam Runner perforations. But the more that I drew this shoe, the more that it felt like a bunch of little designs stuck onto the side of a bigger shoe, and it just felt like it was just a bunch of just different Lego pieces kind of stuck together, and it wasn't really working for me. So while at the end of it, I was okay with the design, I just didn't want to move forward with it because I felt like there wasn't really much potential there. Okay, so now that I've got all the initial concepts down, what I'm gonna do is actually pick probably 2 of these concepts and move forward with them and redraw them in, I guess, a cleaner way. So I've laid out all 8 concepts on one page so we can really get a good idea of what they all look like together. And I think the 2 that I'm really starting to like are the top middle one and the bottom middle one. I didn't place those there specifically, I just happen to like the 2 in the middle. So I like the top one because it looks a lot like the original Foam Runner, except a new iteration of that. And I like the bottom one because it's different. But I also kind of like some of the details that we found in the Coral Foam Runner. I know it's not exactly something that I can incorporate into the other designs, but I do like it. And I also kind of like the heel portion of this ripple design right here. I think that's kind of cool. Again, not sure if I'm going to incorporate that anywhere, but those are sort of the elements that I pulled out of this brainstorm that I really do like. So what I'm going to do is take these 2 designs in the middle and redraw them with the red pen to kind of just outline the parts of the shoe that I like and kind of redesign the shoe in a way that I think will be cleaner and much more manufacturable. And in this case, with the top design, I think I want to sort of slim it down a little bit. I feel like it's a little too big. And in the case of the bottom of the design, I feel like I also kind of want to do one of these where I sort of crunch it down a little bit. But why don't we just start playing with this top design and see where it goes. So the first thing that I want to do is define the shape of the shoe, and that essentially just means cleaning up all these messy lines that I'd used in the brainstorming phase and create the overall shape of the shoe and define what lines are solid and where each line goes. And like I said, the way that I'm going to do that is draw over my original sketch with the red line and really be careful and deliberate about where I'm putting each line and make sure that each line fits where it's supposed to go. Once I got a major outline of all the major shapes that made up the shoe, I wanted to go back in and redefine some of these areas and clean them up, and also add a couple more details. But now that we've got the shape and the details defined, what I'm going to do is fill in the shoe with some color. And I think the way I'm going to do this is go in with a gray base layer and then add in some cool MX or mixed details. And I'm basing the shoe off of the MX Moon Gray or something like that. I forget exactly what the name of that shoe is, but I'm going in with the tan color because that's my favorite color combination of the foam runners. And I'm going to give this shoe sort of a cool mixed and sort of swirling design. And usually when I'm rendering or drawing a shoe, I like to go in with the base color first, like one solid color, and then add shading over top of that. Obviously, because we've got two colors that are acting as a base, I'm going in with the two colors first, and then we'll add the shading on top of this. So from here, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade based on where my red outlines are and kind of give the parts of the shoe that overhang a little bit of shading. And then of course add highlights to the shoe where the light is hitting those parts of the shoe, just to give the shoe some dimension and some form so it doesn't feel like a flat sketch. Once I've got all the shading in, what I'm going to do is go back in with a very thin black outline and redefine all the different details on the shoe. And of course, because this shoe has a bunch of holes in it, I'm going to add some white so it looks like you're just looking right through the shoe itself. Now that a lot of the shading's in, I'm going to redefine the outside line of the shoe by adding a much thicker pencil line. And this is really only a stylistic thing. You don't need to do this, but the reason I like doing this is because it separates the design from the rest of the page and it makes it feel a little bit less finished. Like you can sort of fill in the different details with your mind and you're not restricted to just looking at what you're looking at on the page. It allows you to play with the design a little bit in your head. And now that I'm filling in all the final details, that's pretty much it for this shoe. So like I said, I decided to keep this design very similar to a pair of standard foam runners. And the reason I did that is because I really love the shape of the foam runners. I wanted to keep this shoe in the same sort of design family, but I did accentuate certain details that I felt could use a little bit more personality. For example, the pull tab thing on the heel of the shoe, and also the extended heel portion. But now let's get into the more conceptual and more crazy version of the foam runner. And for this shoe, I decided to go with that very conceptual looking spiky design that I really dug. Now because this shoe is going to be molded out of one piece of foam and is probably going to be pretty difficult to mold, I decided to make it a little bit less crazy because I felt like the simpler the better. And also, things like spikes hanging off the top of the shoe, they're not going to last a long time. They're probably going to break off after a lot of wear. And I also decided to kind of crunch the shoe to make it a little bit thinner but also a little bit longer so that it has a much more speedy aesthetic. And honestly, I just feel like it looks better. So unlike my last sketch where I went in with color first, this one I'm going in with that thin defining black line because I'm still not exactly sure what the overall form of this shoe is going to be. So I want to create that before I add color, because if I change part of the shoe, the shape of the color won't fit that and I'll have to change it again. So I want to define the form first, essentially defining the relationship of the shape of the shoe first before I go in with the nitty gritty and the color. So that's what I'm doing here. One thing I really like about the current foam runners are all the little chamfers that you find throughout the shoe, so I wanted to add a couple of those on this to just give it a little bit more interest and a little bit of a almost topography on the upper of the shoe. I feel like that's kind of interesting. Another detail that I decided to change on the shoe were these perforation cutouts. I obviously added a couple more, but I also decided to move them towards these ridges that I had drawn in already, because I felt like where these cutouts were on the original red sketch, they were just kind of floating in the middle of nowhere. If I push them up against this ridge that I'm drawing on right now, it gives them a little bit more meaning and a little bit more reason for being. It also makes them look a little bit more like gills, which is essentially what the inspiration behind this concept was. But now that I've got the overall shape of the shoe pretty much defined, what I'm going to do is go in with the color. And I think for this shoe I'm going to go in with sort of a light, almost sea blue color because it's the color of my hoodie that I'm wearing right now. And it's also just a nice color overall. I really like it, and we don't see a lot of foam runners with this color. But now that I've got the solid base color in there, I'm going to mask out the shape and start adding in some shading. And again, like the last concept, I'm adding in some white to show you where the punch outs are, and I'm adding in a lot of different shading very quickly because this form is a little bit easier to draw than the last form. Now that I've got a lot of the basic shading in, what I'm going to do is redefine the outside of the shoe with a thick black line like I did on the last concept. Again, it's just to make the shoe look a little bit more sketchy. It's sort of my own design preference, my own design style, and I kind of like that about it. You're not looking at a final product, you're looking at a concept sketch. And the purpose of concept sketches are to give you an idea of what the product could look like, and it also allows you to sort of play with the design in your mind and change things up. So that's the reason I go for this sort of design style. But this is it. This is the second foam runner design, and I think out of the two, I prefer this one because it's a little bit more different, it's a little bit more out there and futuristic, and I just like the form, I like the shape. So I've got to say that this design video is by far the hardest design video that I've done in any of my sneaker design videos, and that's because this ended up being more of a form study than an actual sneaker design video, because the foam runner is essentially just a crazy looking form. It's not really a standard shoe, it doesn't have a bunch of different paneling on the upper, it's just one piece of material and it's kind of molded into a shape that honestly doesn't even look like a shoe. So this one was definitely tough, and for doing it in only 3 to 4 hours, while I don't love both of these concepts, I am happy with the result, and I feel like it could be an interesting direction for YEEZY to take. But that's pretty much all I got. I designed these shoes over the last like 3 or 4 hours, and I'm pretty happy with them. I think personally I prefer the more iterative YEEZY Foam Runner design, which makes sense because that's based on a design that already exists. The newer version of the shoe, while I like it and while it's different, honestly I just don't like the sketch as much, so that's probably why I prefer the other version of the shoe, but it is what it is. But at this point I would love to know your thoughts on these two designs and which version you like better, or maybe if you liked any of the initial sketches better, make sure to let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you all in the next one.